So hello everybody and welcome to our special online debate, which is called The Impact of COVID-19 on Comprehensive Defense. My name is Sigita Struberga and I am Secretary General of Latvian Transatlantic Organization. And we are really happy to greet our experts and participants today. And it's really great to greet you here in the middle of September when everyone actually is very busy and your schedules, I know that they are full. And I think your presence here demonstrates an importance of this issue. And I believe we all will benefit from our great experts here today. And on behalf of our organization, I would like to greet you and also one of the organizers of this discussion is Estonian Atlantic Treaty Association, and its Secretary General, Krista Mullenok, also is here with us today. Please, Krista, the floor is yours for some greetings from your side.
Good morning, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Krista Mullenok, the Secretary General of Estonian Atlantic Treaty Association, and I'm also the Vice President of the Atlantic Treaty Association. Thank you very much for participating in our online event. Having challenging times ahead, NATO more than ever needs citizens and civil society organizations. COVID-19 has affected almost every person in the world. And it is vital that this global health crisis does not turn into a global security crisis as well. And it is very important to understand the information environment, specifically disinformation, to enable a credible response. And that's why such kind of events are very welcome. I would like to thank our cooperation partners, LATO and Nato, and I wish you a fruitful online event. Thank you and good luck.
Thank you, Krista. And I am delighted to moderate discussion with such great experts of security and defense here today. Thank you for being part of the discussion, which is on this very important topic. I am happy to introduce you with Colonel Mark Di Paolo, who is the director of NATO Defense Institution and Capacity Building Directorate. His prior role at NATO was as a head of operation for Afghanistan, Iraq, and the global coalition to defeat Daesh. Before joining NATO, he served at the US National Intelligence Agency as a director. Welcome, Mr. Paolo. Also, we have here today Ms. Kadi Silde. Ms. Kadi Silde is the Undersecretary of Defense Policy at the Estonian Ministry of Defense, where she coordinates policy planning, NATO and EU matters, and international cooperation. Prior to this, she was seconded to the European Commission, where she worked on the European Defense Fund. Also, we have here Mr. Vitalijs Rakstiņš. He is Director of Crisis Management Department at Ministry of Defense of the Republic of Latvia. He has significant experience in homeland security and the resilience, and he is responsible for planning, comprehensive defense, cybersecurity and resilience planning, and execution of resilience exercises for senior officials. From 2012 to 2015, he was serving at NATO, dealing with resilience and civil emergency planning. And he was one of ad hoc experts team to develop 7 NATO resilience guidelines. Welcome, Mr. Rakstiņš and Ms. Silde. And also, as last but not the least speaker, we are going to have Professor Žaneta Ozoliņa. She is the vice chair of the Latvian Transatlantic Organization. And she was also a chairwoman of the Strategic Analysis Commission under auspices of the President of Latvia. She also served on the European Research Area Board and the Foreign Affairs Council of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Baltic Development Forum. At the moment, Žaneta Ozoliņa is also professor at the Department of Political Science at the University of Latvia, and her research areas are transatlantic security and the foreign policy of the Baltic states and European integration. She is an author for more than 100 scholarly articles and books such as Rethinking Security, etc. Welcome, Professor. But now we could start, and before experts will give their speeches, I would like to invite participants to save your questions for Q&A session. You will be invited to raise your hands and I will give floor to your questions. And given the uncertainty of the global crisis caused by COVID-19, it has become clear that well-organized, comprehensive or total defense system, if you wish, is necessity. And this crisis has marked out a number of challenges in national defense systems and in their ability to respond to different crisis situations. Moreover, it has provided an opportunity to draw conclusions on the comprehensive defense system and future actions necessary to overcome the various potential crises. But then the question is, what are those main lessons we have already learned? Mr. Paulo, your directorate houses most of the strategic practical tools under one roof, and this makes collaborative planning and implementation easier for NATO. And the directorate is not only provider of practical assistance to member states and partners, but also gives certain guidelines for good governance and also other very useful adversary support. And now, during pandemics, NATO has demonstrated the capacity to support civilians and to address emerging and ongoing security challenges, such as the one posed by current pandemic through collaborative initiatives, etc. And in your opinion, what are the first conclusions about lessons to be learned on NATO side?
Yeah, thanks very much. And by the way, Zigita and Krista, thank you for inviting NATO to participate in this. And I think it will be a really interesting, but also an important conversation. With respect to the lessons, you know, it became clear early on that NATO had two key roles during the crisis. One was political and one was practical. The political role, which was really important from the deterrence and defense perspective, was to make sure that we transmitted a true message of solidarity among allies, but also from NATO to partners. It was very important politically because particularly related to the disinformation that you had mentioned. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. But the practical role that NATO played was to really focus on preventing this health crisis from becoming a security crisis. And I'll give you a few examples of that if you'll let me. So I'll tell you what NATO did. First of all, and foremost, we protected our operations and missions, and we made sure that those could continue to deliver the effects that were intended. And we were successful in that. We had very few outbreaks of COVID within our missions. They were very quickly isolated and quarantined from the rest. So there was no degradation in our mission. And that comes, that applied to for the battle groups, for example, that we have out in your neighborhood, but also way out as far as Afghanistan and the mission that we have there. So we're very proud that we were able to navigate that successfully. Secondly, the allies all stepped up. They contributed dozens of strategic airlift flights in support of their own citizens. I think the tally is somewhere around 500,000 NATO allies forces supported civil authorities during the pandemic, everything from security to distribution of supplies. They set up 100 field hospitals, which is sort of a uniquely military capability that was very relevant at the time. Here at the headquarters, we established right away a headquarters task force to make sure that our communication across NATO headquarters was quick. And another task force was established down at our supreme headquarters, Allied powers in Europe, for exactly the same reason. And those were quite effective because we had to coordinate 19 different requests from allies and partners for support related to the COVID pandemic. And as a consequence, we had from allies 125 offers of support for those requests. And I'm happy with how the headquarters here and how SHAPE responded. I should mention that one of my roles is I'm also the director of NATO's Disaster Response Center here, so I got to see all of this up close and personal. Interestingly, we also had the opportunity to engage as a sister international organization by providing support to a UN request where we airlifted a field hospital out to Ghana in Western Africa. So lots of new and interesting things for NATO. They were challenges for sure, but I think we pulled them off. We have a program here called Science for Peace and Security, and it's an academic program, and they work with academia, primarily with our partners. And it was really interesting to see how that program shifted very proactively to looking at COVID. So they looked at things like how do we defend against COVID, how do we diagnose COVID, and how do we treat COVID with a whole network of scientists across the globe, really. So that was pretty impressive in my view. And then lastly, NATO established a stockpile of medical equipment and supplies that might be useful during a pandemic. In fact, Assistant Secretary General Manza, who's my boss, is in Italy today receiving a significant US donation of 200 ventilators to that stockpile. And as a companion to that effort, SHAPE developed an operations plan so that we could mobilize military resources if the second wave gets pretty bad. If I could very briefly, and without taking too much of the time, say a word or two about the disinformation and what the implications might be for NATO. Our press and media and public diplomacy people worked overtime because, unfortunately, our adversaries worked overtime injecting disinformation into the COVID crisis. It was quite deliberate. The attacks were targeted, and we had to counter them in order to accomplish the political objective that I had described to you. Let me give you a couple of examples. Out in Latvia, we had an exercise called Steel Brawler, and there were Russian false claims that NATO was deploying forces in without regard for spreading COVID. So we're deploying our forces into Latvia, and we didn't care about the consequences. Where the reality was actually those troops were operating in military areas and completely segregated from the civilian population. Likewise, we had a maritime exercise, Baltops, in the Baltic, where we had the same sort of false claims from the Russian side. But of course, that exercise was out at sea and nobody was at risk. And simultaneously, there were other interesting really creative but despicable disinformation attacks targeted against NATO. So, for example, there was a fake letter ascribed to the Secretary General that was addressed to the Lithuanian defense minister that indicated that we were going to pull troops out. You know, that's a pretty unhelpful message, because it was completely untrue, and the quality of that letter was poor enough that we were able to identify it quickly and correct the record. But there was a fake interview, I think, that suggested that Canada was going to remove troops from Latvia. There was a forged letter from a senior military official in Poland. It was not a real letter, but it was criticizing U.S. troops. So these things required NATO to be actively engaged, and I think we learned a lot. And I think, you know, when we're in a similar position, we'll be even more able to counter these things. We did discover, if I can sort of do some reflection in public here, that on the resilience side, we were not as strong as we need to be. I think we discovered dependencies in supply chains that got our attention. I think there are some cyber issues that we have to address, and allies are now more sensitive to the impact of foreign ownership in certain critical infrastructure like ports and energy. So those were some lessons that we drew, and we've strengthened our resilience requirements as a consequence of that, although that work was ongoing. And lastly, sort of on the horizon, if we look forward, thinking about NATO's role as a security provider, I think first we have to reflect that instability tends to breed more instability. Lots of these, so economies are damaged, which creates anxiety and real problems for citizens. You combine that with an atmosphere where we have COVID mitigation measures like masks and shutdowns of societies that over time become very unpopular with people. It creates a tension that could create instability out at our periphery and even beyond. And, you know, that's happening in an environment where allies are going to be faced with two pressures. First, they have the downward pressure on defense spending because their economies are hurt, but we've got a requirement to address these instability issues. And actually, we're in an era where all allies sort of are increasing defense spending. There's a tension there that we have to address, and we are addressing. But you know, we have 30 allies who have 30 different approaches to their budgeting. For us, it could, if we don't manage it well, it could create a planning problem, because if 30 different economies are affected in 30 different ways, then we have to sort of synchronize the impacts of that on our longer-term defense planning. There are some other things, including some upsides of all this, but I've gone on a little bit too long, so I'll save the positive news maybe for later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Paulo. So we see that NATO and its member states has faced a number of challenges like dependencies of supply chains, disinformation campaigns, lack of resources, problems with shrinking economies, which can result to shrink of defense spending. At the same time, there are, of course, certain success stories like support for certain member states and protected missions, which were mentioned here also. And now I would like to invite to turn to national level, and I would like to give a floor to Ms. Kadi Silde in order to share about Estonian experience. Ms. Kadi Silde, floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much. And I have to apologize, as after my remarks, I will have to leave, but there will be another colleague of mine who will be able to take questions from you. First of all, thank you very much for having me. I think it's a very pertinent topic. we in Estonia, we have had a comprehensive approach enshrined in our strategy documents already since 2010. So for a good 10 years. But I think this has been one of the best stress tests of that approach. And I'll speak a bit longer about that. But as a spoiler, I'll say straight away that I think you in Latvia and the West in general came out of it much better than sometimes seems to be the case in media. But I'll get it in a minute. First, let me say a few words on the general context that we are and we're in. When you look at Russia, then COVID has not significantly affected their military posture. Of course, they have done some adjustments to their military activities, but they went ahead with their big exercise Kafkas. They have fulfilled their targets when it comes to the intake of conscripts, as was the case in 2008 and 2009. We don't expect this to significantly affect their defense budget. They can take cuts everywhere else, but we have seen from experience that defense budget, they will ring fence. The Russian patterns of behavior have not changed either. They continue to show the willingness to use different levers, be it disinformation, be it cyber attacks, be it their mask diplomacy, quote unquote, be it the poisoning of opposition leaders, as we saw it was the case with Navalny, and they are in a way doing things in a comprehensive way, not in a good sense, but still in a comprehensive way. We saw similar patterns emerging from China, and I think this crisis has opened eyes for many about the true nature of China as well. So what did Estonia, and particularly the defense forces, do? First, as has become the mantra, our first task was to make sure that we are able to fulfill our core task. As said, the health crisis cannot turn into a security crisis. Instability in Europe, in the world, has not decreased. Quite the opposite. It has increased. This summer only, we have seen the events in Belarus unfolding. We have seen the events in Mali unfolding. So all the signs are there that the security situation is not getting calmer in any way. So what has that meant? Fulfilling our core task. First, maintaining our situational awareness, and second, maintaining our readiness. Of course, as everyone, we have had to make some adjustments, for example, in terms of exercises, holding them perhaps in a smaller scale than was originally the intent. But we have fulfilled our objectives. Our forces are ready, are trained, and ready to act if the situation is so required. The second thing we have done is help support our civilian structures, and to a quite significant extent. Solving crisis is something that is part of the DNA of defense forces, and I believe we have demonstrated that and are willing to demonstrate that in the future as well. Second wave requires it. I'll just bring a few examples. Out of our Defence League was very heavily involved, so there were more than 2,000 people from the Defence League involved in helping out our civilian institutions. The Defence Forces gave over 70,000 masks to the Health Board. The EDF helped monitor borders. We gave our mobile military hospital to civilian structures to help treat patients, donated medical equipment development, helped out allies as well, allies in the south that were experiencing this health crisis in a more serious way. And this all was possible because we have for years invested in our defense system, developed it in a systemic way, made sure that we have the capabilities that we need, that our units are manned, trained, etc. So in terms of what we need to do going forward, then as unexciting as that might sound, I think we need to do more of the same. First of all, keep our eye on the security situation, and also make sure that our politicians understand that, to make them understand that defense cuts will not just hurt defense, but will hurt us in these sorts of perhaps not just security crisis. In terms of NATO, I will not say much. The previous speaker already very eloquently explained what NATO has done and should do. So again, NATO for us as well should do more of the same. And the EU, perhaps there, one of the things that we need to look at is how we can make the EU see security in a more comprehensive way, because the EU has not perhaps so many military tools, but has all the other tools. So EU-NATO cooperation in that sense is critical as well going forward. But with that, I'd wrap up with my remarks. As I said, we'll be happy to take further questions.
Okay, thank you very much. So we heard those challenges Estonia was facing and those steps which were done, and we can see that pretty similar conclusions have been done, including information environment and need to keep defense spendings at the same level, etc. But now I would like to ask Latvian side to share our Latvia's experience on the challenges we faced and on the lessons we have learned. Mr. Vitalijs Rakstīņš, please, floor is yours.
Yeah, good day. So first of all, thanks for opportunity to share also our experience. And I also have to caveat myself because as we are in the middle of crisis, so many lessons learned are still undergoing. So we're trying to pick up them. And that's why I will represent my own opinion partly as practitioners, because this formal process of lessons learned is still ongoing. And as I mentioned, so we're still in the middle of crisis, so many things could also appear. And the second one, I also don't want to repeat many things already my colleagues told, because the similar stuff about the support to civil sector from military side, also disinformation is also applicable to us. So I will try to say something new or in addition, and not to repeat my colleagues, but obviously we see the similar problems and the similar lessons learned. So if I could split impact of COVID into short term and long term, then in short term, maybe this impact on military side is less visible because we still maintain our military posture. We are combat ready. Of course, we have introduced some additional safety protocols. Some events or exercises were postponed or cancelled. But there is no impact on combat readiness. And as we see, for instance, now we are exercising, and the biggest exercise nowadays are ongoing now. So our military force do participate in it. And of course, so allies are still present here, EFP group, so it didn't make any impact on military posture. But of course, it showed other problems that the dependence on military support. So as we see any civil contingencies, they need military support. And we see that military staff was providing this assistance for civil defense unit, for public order, And also, as in our case, we also procured all this protective equipment for all medical stuff. But it also shows this vulnerability that in case if there is also other threats like military threats, and army is not able to support civil sectors, that we are lacking of reserves. Who will support civil sector, civil defense if the military are on the borders or fulfilling other orders? But from positive view, it also, if I may say in such a way, that it also stresses the need for this preparedness to all type of hazards. Because what we see is that in parallel of COVID, there are still earthquakes, there are still technological catastrophes, disasters ongoing in the world. So we need to be ready to any type of crisis. And I think it's one of the main focus of this comprehensive national defense system to be ready for any type of crisis. In long term, and mainly because of these economic consequences, I think it will have impact on military because on defense capabilities, because a lot of projects have been postponed or in delay. We also have to review our budgets and fight for 2% maybe. But it's also will have impact to military industry because they have to maintain expertise at home. They have to delay some strategic projects. It could also impact the research and development of the industry. And of course, as we see that European Defence Fund and the military mobility projects, they are also reduced in money because of all these activities. So my concern that in long term, it could cause, but positive, not positive, but good lessons learned is that as a region, we didn't so much about security of supply. And this crisis with this particular dependence on some medical equipment shows that why it's so important. And if we are looking at military crisis, it could be the same. So security of supply could be the main concern, also for incoming forces, but also to maintain this decision-making capabilities and resilience of the society. That's why we support all initiatives by European Union and also NATO review these resilience requirements with a focus on security of supply, also foreign direct investment, and in different ways. So what the main problem will be not the concept of stockpiling for state institutions, because we have some lessons learned, and I think the strategic stocks of critical item inventory will be bigger. But the problem is that the private sector also should change their business models, because now it's just-in-time business model, no stockpiling and full dependence on logistics. But this crisis shows that, we should have plan B, and it also shows that all these entrepreneurs who had plan B or this some business continuity plan, they were able to survive crisis and also get good revenue by providing services. So this is philosophy of this resilience on readiness culture. What we want to introduce that preparedness to any type of hazards, both for individual, and that's why we have this similar campaign like many other nations, 72 hours, with this any engagement with civil society to be able to cope by their own for at least 72 hours, to have some reserves at home, to have this knowledge, and of course ability to provide critical services. And that's why all these NATO resilience requirements are very useful for us, and we are trying to implement them in our national legislation to continue ensuring that all these vital services have been provided in crisis, also during the crisis, not to restore them, but that they are available during the crisis. I think this crisis also showed that that we need to change the way how we engage private sector, and we saw a lot of volunteers, a lot of industry proposing their support to us, and not always we were able to absorb it. So what we want also to change is the culture of cooperation, that we need to engage with our partners from private sector before the crisis. We have to have this comprehensive risk assessment, joint exercise, joint training. And before this meeting, I left my colleagues when we have this exercise with the biggest energy providers of Latvia, playing some crisis scenarios, also military scenarios. And we do this exercise with all the biggest entities of the bank sector, food entrepreneurs, to train them to be ready to any type of crisis and change the cooperation, that we're also asking their advice how to improve our national defense system. And of course, yeah, this disinformation, but there's also other problems that sometimes there is mistrust, or not citizens are not trusting government, and we see that if there is untrust, that the panic buying starts, that we see the empty shelves of many shops when there was some unclarity. And I think our government was doing well, so because they based all their decisions on science, on data, and they all were transparent, and it could be, and it was easy to explain to people. But of course, what we see, and I think this term of infodemics, that a lot of fake information, and I still know a lot of people who do not believe that COVID do exist. Yeah, that I think there's a problem of media literacy, of critical thinking. This is one of the must. That's why it's one of the pillars of our national comprehensive defense, to educate people to starting from schools, and then to go to their parents and other. Yeah, and of course, I think and international cooperation, of course, it is the key, and I think we are fully grateful to our allies who supported us during the crisis. We also try to send our support to allies who have this severe impact. But it also, everything what happened during the COVID, it could also be during the military crisis. So any lessons learned should be also applicable to any type of crisis. And what I want to avoid, at least in our situation, that we manage our crisis management system to agile it only to one type of crisis, because pandemic now is a key problem, and not to make the system for only one type of crisis, because as we saw in Croatia and in Lebanon, the other crises could be at the same time, and we need the system which is comprehensive and could respond to any type of crisis. So, yeah, I will stop here, but I will be ready to answer to any questions later. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rakstic. So we can conclude that basically, again, in Latvian case also, there were those challenges with disinformation, lack of reserves at certain moments in order to support civilians. The question was asked about preparedness to any type of crisis, and not only one of them. Then also the question was about the reductions in investments, not only on prior military expenses, but also regarding the investments in military industry, which could be influenced by those reductions. And also the question was about the resilience on issues of providing vital services for the society. We have heard that basically, on another hand, both countries, both militaries of both countries have been pretty ready for such a crisis and have been responded pretty well. And NATO also has taken part in providing support. On another hand, the question is about the readiness of society, and speakers already talked a bit about the infodemia issues, and the fact that there are still people who don't believe that COVID exists as such. And also a question could be raised if instruction regarding the ways how people should act in 72 hours is being useful for this type of crisis at the moment, and which parts of these instructions can be used. But in order to give a bit more glimpse on societal level, I would like to ask Professor Žaneta Ozoliņa to give her opinion on it. Professor
Thank you.
Mazzoli?
Yeah, thank you, Sigita. Actually, it will not be my opinion. It will be more opinion of respondents who participated in research on subjective perception of security in Latvia, but I will definitely add my own comments as well. So I would like to start with thanking Krista, who actually in her introductory remarks mentions the role of civil society when we are addressing comprehensive defense and comprehensive security issue, because the government can draft the best strategies and the best policy papers, but if there is no public support, then unfortunately, then those fantastic ideas will stay on the paper, but they will not be applied in real life, and society will not feel secure. Then I was caught by surprise, Sigita, when you said that our countries, Estonia and Latvia, were ready to the crisis, and the way how the crisis was managed demonstrated that the government knew exactly what they are doing. I think it just happened because nobody in this world was prepared for such crisis as COVID-19. And definitely in smaller countries, which are better organized, where public administration is at place, when legislation is more or less already prepared, you just can start the ball rolling faster than sometimes when it comes to bigger countries and to bigger institutions. So it demonstrates a certain strength and certain credibility and preparedness, but on the other hand, you can never be prepared for such kind of crisis as COVID. But there are definitely lessons learned, but on the other hand, there are things which have to be taken into account and issues which have to be addressed very seriously. And we started to do our research on security perception in Latvia in 2018, of course, much more before pandemic. But on the other hand, this research was taking place during 2 years. We collected a lot of information, different attitudes, responses, and so on. And in some of final stages of research, COVID already appeared. So it's not exactly about the COVID, but still there are some repercussions there seen in the study. So the departure point is that if you look at public opinion polls, which mostly focus on quantitative figures, then our defense really is in a very good shape, because the National Armed Forces is the most trusted institution in the country. And if something goes wrong, then you know that armed forces will be the ones who will be addressed and will be trusted. And by the way, which was also an interesting point, that when Latvia started its procurement regarding medical equipment and drugs, so procurement was delegated to Ministry of Defense as an institution who at least ensure that corruption will be prevented to a minimum level at least. So institution which is very trusted in that sense. However, of course, to be honest, not always brilliant and smooth and nice, but still the system is at place, and this is very important. And our research also demonstrated that defense is very much trusted by population. But then there was one very alarming tendency, which was evident almost across all focused groups, different municipalities where we were, and it was trust in local government, but distrust in the national government. So there is a definite gap between those two governing structures. And for instance, on the one hand, it's good that at least there is a governing structure which is trusted. But decisions on defense, decisions on resilience very often are taken in the capital, but implemented in localities. So therefore, what Kadi and also Vitalis mentioned about culture of cooperation, culture of solidarity, it has to be strengthened and improved. Otherwise, again, well-designed and well-planned plans could fail because there is no support on the local level. And as far as what also Vitalis mentioned, disaster management, either natural disasters or industrial disasters. So who will fix actually the whole situation? Of course, there will be specially trained units, but on the other hand, responsibility will be in hands of municipalities. So there is a certain problem which has to be addressed. Another point is that on the one hand, relevant, not always strategically relevant, but anyway, industries which are of relevance to security issues from the comprehensive perspective. Municipalities, non-governmental organizations, they have to be, let's say, made like a chain where each its part supports another part. At the present moment, our study showed that these parts, which could assist in resilience, exist in the country, but they are not always connected. So therefore, this connectivity is one of very important issues. Another discovery in our research was that there is a high support to armed forces, but there are different perceptions of NATO member states troops in Latvia, because sometimes they are perceived as a guarantee to security because they are here to protect. But on the other hand, there are questions what will be the reaction of those troops in case of crisis. And again, for me as a scholar, it's more or less clear, but if population is asking those questions, the answers have to be provided. Another point, what was to a large extent surprising, that people do not feel confident and informed enough about how to act in case of crisis. So if this X hour comes, what to do? And in recent months, Ministry of Defense with its partners really have invested a lot of efforts in informing society what and how to do. But still, when I was receiving a message from the State Revenue Service that I have a message which have to be read, okay, as a person who pays taxes and is connected electronically to this institution, I of course checked. I knew in advance what is there, but still I checked. But I'm not quite sure that majority of Latvian population will seriously take this message and will read it. And also our study demonstrated that there should be a novel approaches how to communicate with society, to try to put at place something which goes aside of official channels of communication. And the final point which I wanted to make is that this research showed that society trusts in media very much because there are lack of information about what is happening sometimes on government side. So population really tries to get as much as information from media. And it means that media really plays a very responsible role when it comes to security issues. And it also has its recommendation side that all those who are informing society about different crisis situations or introduction of policy strategies or whatever have to work very closely with media and trying to get through messages as much as possible, as often as possible. And by the way, COVID crisis exactly demonstrated that Latvian media was very responsible. So they didn't really relied on some kind of strange information sources. They didn't pick those fake news. They tried to be really partners for the government rather than those who are again trying to seed tension and mistrust in decisions taken by the government. So overall, the picture in the end of the study is like a rainbow. You can have bright colors, but at the same time, there are also dark colors. But I hope that in the end, when we will publish results of our study with recommendations, at least some of those gaps will be closed. And I'm very optimistic in the end. So, and thank you very much for organizing this discussion.
Thank you very much for giving insight in this research. And now we could turn to Q&A session. And before to start to ask the questions which have been sent to private chat to me, I wanted to take a chance and to ask questions from myself to our honorable speakers. My first question would go to Deputy of Ms. Silde. I would like to ask regarding resilience of society or readiness of society in Estonia. So we hear the situation here in Latvia from Professor Ozoliņa, but I know that in Estonia, before the crisis, there was also a research at 2018, and actually the results were pretty similar to the ones which we heard. People, the most part of society said that they really don't know what would be their role during the crisis and what would they have to do during the crisis, even though the comprehensive system has been started to introduce starting from 2010 in Estonia. Still, Estonians face the same challenges. So I wanted to ask, what are the first conclusions from COVID crisis? How society reacted, and did people know their roles at the beginning?
Let me first introduce myself. I'm Eve Vungo. I'm the Director of International Cooperation at the Estonian MOD. Coming back to your question, Estonian society is very proud to have a strong voluntary culture. We have our Defense League, which has a women's branch, the Women's Defense League. We also have a children's organization participating in this voluntary security network of Estonia. And our Defense League is actually one of the key players of this security network covering Estonia. I think it was 1 or 2 years ago when the female branch of our Defense League produced an app, Be Ready, which offers good advice for everybody how to improve your readiness when any crisis hits you, be it energy crisis, if there's a big storm, how do you get water if there's no water running from the tap. So we have been actually working on this issue for quite a long time. And I can also echo the sentiment from Latvia that our defense forces and our Defense League are also one of the most trusted institutions in Estonia. Also, our police is very highly, and the rescue board is very highly regarded upon. So, of course, in the beginning of the crisis, everybody was in shock. Nobody knew what to do. In the hindsight, we can say that what our government did, what our municipal, local government institutions did was in most part good decisions. We can still say that there was a lot of insecurity. Some of us wanted to overreact, to shut down everything. Some of us wanted to keep up with the normal life, but so there was a lot of moving back and forth, and it still continues. Now, after the emergency situation, you can still hear from local governments that, we should shut down the schools for, let's say, the older classes. So There is a lot of discussion in the society, what is the correct level, how should we react, but also we hear more and more voices that we have to learn to live with this virus. We cannot shut the Estonian society down again like we did it in the springtime. So we are trying to find ways how to mitigate it. Our health system has been very strong. The hospitals are holding up. There are not many patients. So I would say that we have made our first lessons learned. That includes also the defense forces, the defense ministry. And there are indeed a lot of lessons learned. We have been lucky at the defense institutions to have had this system of exercises. We have been exercising inside our ministry and also on our government's level yearly, at least twice. We do a big exercise and we test our crisis systems. And indeed, that was perhaps why our ministry, our defense forces were one of those more solid rocks in this governmental network, supporting the situation and the upkeeping of Estonian society. So, for example, there are many lessons. Also, we're still working on many of them. One of those lessons could be cyber, for example. How do we continue our work? How do we continue our secure communications? Do we have enough secure communication networks with our colleagues in NATO, for example, with our colleagues in other countries? So after having drawn those conclusions, we still have a lot of work to do to tackle those challenges and to make sure that we actually can live with this virus as long as needed before the vaccines come, and we can hopefully one day return to the normal life again.
Thank you very much. And also, before to start to ask questions from audience, I wanted to ask one more question from myself to Mr. Paolo. So we can conclude from Latvian experience that basically Latvia was not really targeted by Chinese disinformation campaign. Europe, yes, it was targeted, NATO in a way also, so my question would be, what are the main conclusions regarding Chinese disinformation campaign concluded in NATO while learning this ways how China communicates?
So I'm not one of our professional communicators.
Sorry, we don't hear you.
How about now? Can you hear me now?
We don't hear you. The mic is off.
Okay. How about now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Fantastic. I'm not a professional communicator, but I can share with you the observations that we've sort of generally seen here on the staff. The Russian communications were so typical of this sort of malevolent Russian desire to just spoil. There was Chinese disinformation for sure. They seized the opportunity to attempt to portray NATO as less capable or incapable of helping itself. But it seems to me that the nature of their communication was primarily aimed at deflecting blame from China. It didn't seem quite as aggressive as the Russian disinformation. Now that was still unhelpful because I believe there were Chinese statements that suggested that the virus originated in NATO countries, for example, and that doesn't help any public health officials develop plans. That doesn't help citizens get a grasp of what their role should be. So I don't mean to suggest that it was benign, but it was certainly not as malicious, I think, as the Russian information.
Okay, Thank you very much. And here is also a question from Ms. Rovena Berger to you. And she asked, how can NATO deal with opposing opinions between its member states on the development of comprehensive defense? Mr. Paolo?
That was for me. Forgive me. I'm sorry. Repeat the question. Sorry. I thought that was to the other.
So Ms. Berger asked, how can NATO deal with opposing opinions between its member states on the development of comprehensive defense?
Yeah, forgive me there. I think actually Professor Ozulina points to what we need to do. We have a different center and periphery problem here at NATO because we have 30 allies who have 30 foreign policies and defense policies, and we come up with all kinds of bright and creative ideas here at NATO headquarters. But if we don't communicate them well, and if we don't give them messages that will resonate well with their publics, that can be retransmitted in a coherent way that tells a unified story, it's going to be a challenge. And when the crisis hit and 30 allies each went into crisis mode in a different way, everything from Sweden's approach to some of the more the United States, where I'm from, took quite a hard line, I think, shutting its society down. It takes a little while to develop a coherent approach, and I do agree with the point that we shouldn't prepare for the same crisis next time, because we won't have the same crisis next time. But we need to learn the lessons, and it could be really worse if we just stay thinking about pandemics, for example. Somewhere on this globe, there is an evil person who's thinking about the lessons they could draw and how they might use cheap technologies like CRISPR, genetic modification technologies that are easily acquired and easy to use, and how they might use artificial intelligence to increase the lethality of some human-made pandemic agent. And then if that happens, we're going to have way less time to react. So I think the thinking ahead about how we can communicate very quickly a coherent plan that can be retransmitted will be absolutely essential. And the next crisis will probably not be a pandemic. It will be something else we can't even conceive of right now.
Thank you very much. And please, now I would like to invite participants to raise their hands in order to ask the questions. But while we have a question from Davis Stepanos, and he's asking how the recently adapted comprehensive defense will impact the everyday life in the future. I think it could be addressed to Mr. Rakstins and also to Estonian part, since they have more experience on comprehensive system. Please, Mr. Rakstins.
Yeah. To answer shortly, it will cost us, because resilience usually costs money, and I'm talking now about this. As I mentioned, the security of supply. So, for instance, to change this just-in-time business model, to have bigger stocks here, so it will cost entrepreneurs. The same for other critical service providers, to have these systems have backups of systems, some kind of business continuity plannings. It will cost them also, and also to organize these trainings and to agile systems. But it's also maybe to also answer to previous questions, that it's very hard to measure preparedness, because you can verify, does people know about the new system? Okay, I have heard something. But are they ready? Only crisis could show. So are they ready to respond? Will they act as they answered on the polls? To visualize how this comprehensive national defense system for individuals could look like, I could mention this example of Japan and other nations who have this regular earthquakes. So they have the system that something, alarm systems start to work, and they already have this civil defense systems how to react. But I think it's complex of different players, and to introduce new system, we have to change mindset, of course, how we operate. And I think COVID is also a good example that until we do have this vaccine or some cure from this pandemic, that people need to change their behavior, at least to protect other people. And so it's a change in mindset, but also investment in resilience, both in digital and in kinetic resilience, so in general.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Seeing from Estonia, what is a major problem for us? I mentioned our good voluntary state defense mentality. One of our problem is that perhaps a defense forces force member can be a member of Defense League, but this person can also be signed up as a voluntary firefighter. So our challenge is to actually stick to our core tasks to make sure that we do not multiply the number of this one defense serviceman, that we don't count that there is this one person who cannot be at the same time in 3 different functions, being a Defense League member, a Defense Forces member, fighting a fire. So I very much agree with our Latvian colleague that it does require resources. And more than 10 years ago, when we started to work on our comprehensive defense, Defense Ministry was one of those institutions who started to talk to our government office that all of the ministries need to chip in, all of the institutions, the hospitals, we all need to improve our resilience. But the first reaction was, so shall the Defense Ministry give us money for that? You say that we should have more capacity in our hospitals. You say that our Ministry of Interior should have more capacity. So you will give us money from the defense budget, right? You have this wonderful 2%. So that question has mostly disappeared by now. And the mentality that we all need to chip in has arrived. However, the resources are still not there. In that respect, the defense sector, where we have this 2% pledge, we have been lucky because with this 2% predictability, we can project our defense spending ahead for 10 years. We have the certainty that, yes, we can make these investments. Yes, we are not going to buy the stock of masks full perhaps in November, but we can fill this gap that that was caused in the spring by, let's say, February, or we will have much more money in 4 years for another investment. But such long-term planning experiences and long-term resourcing practices would be very beneficial also all around the government sector. So how to reach that, it's beyond the defense, but we can certainly spread this mentality and spread this culture of readiness.
Thank you, thank you. And now we have a question from Emily Linda Mendelssohn. She asks, currently the primary responsibility to respond to hybrid threats or attacks rests with target nation. Would you consider the idea that strategy of hybrid threats launched against the whole NATO bloc, like disinformation about NATO soldiers' presence, and not towards a particular country, should be charged and met with the common response? Maybe we could start with Mr. Paolo, please.
Sure, that is a really hard question. because, one of the bright ideas that you could get here at NATO headquarters that I was talking about was you could design sort of a perfect response to that sort of scenario. But that would require perfect cooperation from 30 different sovereign nations, and it just won't happen. So I think the approach we've taken is the optimum that we can get, and will in the end make the strongest possible system, which is to push resilience baseline requirements out to allies, requirements that they can agree with. And cyber is obviously a very significant part of that. And then to constantly work with allies to ensure that we get them implemented. There's so much about cyber and hybrid responses to hybrid activities in general that we don't understand. And once you understand one aspect of it, a whole new different dimension gets created. So one master plan will be a challenge. I think by getting the requirements out there, it puts all of the allies, it makes them responsible, and no government can look to some other entity as being responsible. And I think that will make us a far stronger, more resilient system.
Thank you. And also, maybe I would like to ask Professor Uusvalini to reflect on the issue of hybrid threats as well a bit.
Yeah, thank you. Indeed, it's a very tough question, but I think it's not so tough for the one who asks this question. It's much tougher for those who have to respond to this question. The point is that if you look at hybrid threats, then usually you can see them at the moment when they are not soft, if I can use this terminology, but when they are already hard. But then there's this question whether this hard hybrid threat is exactly the competence of NATO. So therefore, it's something what on the one hand you can feel, but feeling is not enough for acting and for taking decisions on behalf of all 30 nations. It's very complicated. And actually, I don't have answer to this question, but it's more like thinking, and I was yesterday also participating in one of those Zoom debates, which becomes routine of our life. And there was a question debated how far NATO can stretch, because those threats are piling up more and more and more. And NATO has certain capabilities which are not often intact with those new types of threats. And this also explains why we don't have an answer right now. We are all in the state of transition from kind of static system, static threats to dynamic ones. And here comes the issue of countries and also the alliance being able to function constantly, not just to follow the issue, but to be in the middle of the issue and to take decisions very, very rapidly. Luckily, NATO is much better than the EU in that sense, but still it requires much faster pace of debating, agreeing, and acting. And one issue which I'm concerned of, I wanted to raise it a little bit later, but probably now it goes in line. Very often today, all of us, we mention the term resilience. And it seems to me that we use this term resilience more like a word describing almost everything. But probably it's time to give more essence or more concrete essence to this term, and at least to try to draft a resilience index, which could help, first of all, for those who are involved in resilience building to agree precisely on what we mean by this term. It also adds some measurements, because I agree, it was Vitalis who said, or I don't know, it's difficult to measure preparedness. And indeed, preparedness is something more sensitive. So are you ready to wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning, or you are not prepared? You cannot measure it. But resilience is something what you can measure. And this resilience index would help very much to individual countries to see the progress which has been made from year to year. And this index also helped to inform society what resilience means and what they have to do on their own part. Because again, it's not up to the government, but it's up to also individual to build his own resilience. But if he or she is not aware what resilience is about, so how you can build it, there is some kind of confusion. And therefore, I'm speculating right now. I have some ideas, but I think that it would help. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor. So we have some more questions. Eva Kristine Kulikowska is asking, in the light of social media platform like Facebook, Instagram, Google, creating an information bubbles around citizens and assuming that information bubbles will become more polarized and tougher to penetrate, how does NATO view and deal with this challenge going further to inform and reach public and officials with factual information? I guess the question is to Mr. Paolo.
So I think the professor said that we're in a time of transition. And this is one area where a large institution like NATO that over 70 years became very successful in communicating a certain way is forced to learn about brand new environments. And it's difficult for anyone. I have a young teenage daughter. It's difficult for her to keep up with how these social ecosystems evolve. So you can imagine for an old guy like me and our communications experts here, it's a challenge. I don't know that we've conquered that yet. I don't know that we have the expertise. We have Twitter accounts, true. Our Twitter accounts resonate well with some of those bubbles. I don't know if they resonate well with other of the bubbles. You know, maybe we need different types of engagements for different ones. Incredibly complex. It's going to require experimentation. It's going to require a little bit of risk taking, which our culture is we don't like risk. Our culture is to reduce risk, not to go seek out risk areas. So I think this is an area where we have more work to do, and the work is ongoing, but we're not quite there yet. And it's a problem. I mean, we see it. This gets back to the professor's point about the center and the periphery and the message not getting out. We can't throw up our hands and say that those information bubbles, particularly the ones more on the fringe that are distasteful to us, we can't say that they're irrelevant because the threats are appearing in places that, for NATO, our threats are appearing where we're not strong. And so that's where we need to go to make NATO even more effective. So we have a lot of work to do. We probably need to hire younger people who have different hair colors and lots of different accounts.
Thank you very much. We have one more question from Paul Sixness, and he has a question regarding democracy and parliaments. And he's asking what role the parliaments are playing during the crisis and what role can interparliamentary diplomacy play in the crisis? Who would like to pick this question maybe? Regarding parliaments?
Can I?
Yes, please.
I want to be a little bit nasty. On the one hand, Parliament is one of the biggest values of democracy. And Parliament, it's a place where you can debate, talk, exchange views, you can fight with ideas, and it's definitely, in that sense, it's very important. But I don't think that in terms of policy making, concrete decisions, actions, that it plays a very big role. It's more really a symbol of democracy. 30 countries, so different views, so different positions. They have to be compromised. In the end, Parliament is the institution which puts a big stop on what governments and societies were debating before. In that sense, it has its role, but I definitely wouldn't say that this is the institution. It's important, but not the one who will really make a big difference. But I wanted a little bit to reflect on the question about the information bubble. I think that information bubbles are not about facts. Those people who are creating their eco community, they are doing just because they are not interested in facts, but they need people who support their views. They are searching for a like-minded people. And therefore, I think this approach to those information bubbles, again, should be different. These are changes in societal construction. These are different type of interrelations which are appearing in our societies. And we just have to study and more probably look into behavior sciences rather than going straight into the facts. Because you can take the most knowledgeable people and you can put facts on the table and they can say, yeah, but I can have different facts. So why I should take yours? And I have numerous examples how, for instance, scientists from hard sciences who always rely on facts, suddenly they are trapped in mystique, in religion. So you can't just believe that it can happen with people who spend their whole life just relying on facts. Yeah? So I think that it's very much about psychology, it's about changing behavior, perceptions, and probably we should look at social media slightly from different angle. So I will stop here.
Thank you, Professor. Since our time is coming to the very end, I wanted to ask maybe speakers have some concluding remarks regarding information bubbles or some conclusions regarding lessons we have learned.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead if you don't mind, and let me reiterate my thanks to all of you and the other colleagues who are speaking. Let me end kind of on a positive note. We talked a lot about what the challenges are and what NATO did well and maybe where we need to do better. But there are some interesting positives that have come out of all of this. I would think nobody wants these economies to weaken, but as they weaken, we have to prioritize. And I think for NATO, a consequence of that is that we will be, in a European context, brought back closer to the center of relevance for European defense planning. The weakened economy puts, I think, pressure on the PESCO idea, puts pressure on the European Defense Fund, and NATO, particularly with lots of non-European countries contributing, will probably be even more relevant. And that will be useful because I think maybe we could stop the drift of Europe away from North America that seems sometimes sort of mutually desired. We can stop that drift and maybe reflect a little bit more about what we want. Secondly, a consequence of prioritizing when you don't have the resources that you want is you have to make hard decisions. And so the time might be right to put a little bit more pressure on arms control, because, you know, if you think about Russia, who suffered from COVID, whose economy is hit, but they're also hit because oil prices are extraordinarily low. They might be very incentivized to avoid costly, expensive arms development competition, and that goes on the conventional and on the nuclear side. So there's a potential window of opportunity there, and I know some are already actively seeing what can be done. And then lastly, about our ability to speed up our decision making and communication. We were forced to change decades-old practice of in-person meetings of defense ministers and foreign ministers. And we met with them online at something that would have never happened before COVID. And it turns out they were successful meetings. And I think even when COVID is gone, we're probably going to retain that. And it's of great value to be able to convene with very little notice defense ministers or policy directors or foreign ministers of 30 countries to address a specific topic without requiring them to travel to Brussels. So I think that's going to give us lots of agility that we didn't have before, and I'm really happy to see it. And it wouldn't have happened without COVID, because that just wasn't how we did business here at NATO. Thanks again for everything.
Thank you very much. Now we could continue with the final remarks of next speaker, please.
Thank you for the organizers. I will be very brief as our time is ending. What I would say is that we have not finished the marathon yet. We are still very clearly in the midst of the marathon. We don't know how the end will be, whether it will be mountainous terrain or what will be ahead of us. So in that respect, I will go back to this question of politicians and parliaments. I would say that we all need to chip in. Also, the politicians should be engaged and embraced in those discussions. How do we mitigate the consequences of this virus? How do we keep up security and defense budgets? So to have a legitimate feeling of the government's decisions, to have an overall acceptance of the steps that need to be taken. Also, the politicians should talk to each other. The experts should talk to each other. We should all be open to have this engaging conversation. How do we go and how do we proceed to overcome this very difficult situation? I will stop here and thank you for all the organizers and speakers.
Thank you very much. Mr. Rakstins.
Yeah, thanks. From my point, as it was said before, that the first wave of COVID was strategic shock for everyone, I think, and these following waves will show how we are prepared to it. But it's also applicable to climate change and other mega trends which are happening now, with the main perception that these risks and threats cannot be eliminated. What you can do, you can just agile a system to adapt, to make adaptation. And then that's why all these ideas of investing in resilience, they are very close to all these United Nations sustainable goals and all these initiatives with the green recovery. So to invest wisely in this resilience recovery. And of course, we are somewhere in the beginning, if Estonians have already 10 years experience with this comprehensive national defense, we are only second year. So that's why we have a lot of meetings and explanations. And it was very correct comments about these municipalities. That's why our main focus this year is municipalities. We are visiting a lot of them, wargaming, explaining what we are doing, and I think so. We are on the beginning of this. So thanks for the opportunity to share our view, and yeah, keep in touch.
Thank you very much to all speakers. questions are still appearing in chat, but unfortunately our time is already over. And I would like to say thank you to all speakers and to participants. And there are many things which at least I have taken from this discussion. So we can conclude that we still need and will need to put defense as a priority, and we have to pay attention on culture of cooperation and culture of solidarity. We need to improve numbers of reserves and take proper care for investments in science and technologies. But I guess one of the most important issues is how to properly look on overall resilience, especially societal resilience in here. And indeed, there should be novel approaches how experts, how organizations, how the states should communicate with their societies in order to build this resilience. And indeed, so if we will do all those homeworks, I believe our systems will be more ready to any crisis, and we will be able to stay strong during this dynamic processes in the world. And I would finish with this today. Thank you very much once more, and hope to see you in other discussions, including Riga conference, which we are going to have on November 12th, 13. We will have hybrid formats, so you can join us online. Looking forward to have all of you there. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.